Hi, I'm Michael Pooley and I've been a long-term member of Sydney Playback Theatre, which this year, 2020, celebrates its 40th birthday. In 1980, 4 members of the original playback company, and you can see them here in this flyer for the Sydney leg of the trip, travelled to New Zealand and Australia for a series of workshops and performances. Over the last 12 months, I've had the privilege of interviewing some of those who were involved in that trip. My intention wasn't to create a definitive history of the trip, but rather just to hear from some of those who were involved. I'm not a film or documentary maker. You'll see variations in lighting and sound all the way through. Some of the interviews were done under difficult circumstances, but I hope you can see through that and just enjoy what people had to share about that time. This is the first of a 2-part series. This first part focuses on the trip in 1980. The second part focuses on what happened after the trip, an establishing of playback theatre companies in Sydney and Melbourne. I hope you enjoy these recollections.
I'm Bridget Brown, and along with Frances Batten, I'd say that we were the founding members of Playback Theatre in Sydney, Australia. And that journey actually began in New Zealand in about 1976. We were living in Martinborough, New Zealand, with a theatre group called Theatre Action. And we were closely associated with this, on this property with this guy called Alistair Taylor. And one day I remember him calling me into his big office in this big old house that they lived in, saying, "Hey, you might be interested in this. There's this guy in New York. He's doing something called Playback Theatre." I sort of shrugged my shoulders, I think. I said, "Oh yeah, that sounds interesting," not having really a clue.
Yeah.
I can't remember how much more I asked of it, or of him, of the system, or what it was about.
Right.
So, my name's Mary Good, and so I met this man, Jonathan Steiner, from New York. I think that was his surname, and he told me about Jonathan Fox. So I wrote to Jonathan and got a lovely letter back, and then I spoke to Phil Bellows, and Phil Bellows went and saw the work, which was more than I had done.
He went over to New York.
Yeah.
We were touring around Australia in between semesters, earning our livelihood by running workshops, clown workshops, dance workshops, neutral mask workshops. And there was sort of an incredible hunger for this work of physical theatre. I think people really loved the spontaneity of it and the physicalness of it and the joy. So that was 1980. Which was the first year of Drama Action Centre. Suddenly we have all these students arriving from all over New Zealand and Australia to study. And I mean, it was fabulous.
It was a school that combined several things. The mask work of Jacques Lecoq, improvisational theatre, and the process and methods of Marino and psychodrama. And it was a completely unique combination.
There are 2 key elements to this. One is that someone from Melbourne who was not involved in playback, Phil Boas from PIT, saw us perform in New York City, and being the kind of person he was, he immediately said, "I want to bring you to Australia." And he managed to pull it off, which was for us a huge thrill. At the same time, Bridget and Frances, from the time that they were in New Zealand, one of their good friends happened to have our first brochure, a little brochure that said Playback Theatre, and showed it to them. And they kind of saw improvisation, and they saw, I don't know if psychodrama was mentioned, but
think so.
They clicked with that. And so somehow, as Phil Boas tried to organize the trip, and they knew they wanted to somehow connect with us, that first visit, with Mary in Melbourne and then with Drama Action Centre in Sydney was arranged.
I had the opportunity to spend a very interesting hour with Phil Boas, but that interview was voice recorded only. He remembered seeing Playback Theatre in New York for the first time, and in his words, remarked on the immediate connectivity it created. He had no hesitation in inviting Playback Theatre to Australia.
He was the kind of engine,
Yes.
I remember him saying in this very forthright Aussie way, what would it take to bring 6 of you to Australia? Very point blank, and so and we worked out the cost, and it ended up being 4 of us that came. Yeah. But he was, I think, a very good organizer, and in retrospect, that was a very major task that he pulled off, and it, led to much more than any of us expected.
Yeah.
It seemed to be very fast from my point of view. I think we had developed a tradition of doing the end of a psychodrama conference. That's I think where we were seen by Phil. Just as we look back karmically, or the right people at the right time.
Yes.
How could it be otherwise, right?
Was it difficult for you to make the choice to come? Was it possible? Was it, how did that?
Well, at that time, good question, because I had 2 kids, 9 and 11, and I was a single mother, and I had a job as a program coordinator. So all these things I would have to change, but I was determined to come and did what needed to happen.
So your first actual contact was when Jonathan and Joe came to Sydney to do the workshops, your actual... Yeah, okay.
I think it was to Melbourne actually they came.
Yes, they came to Melbourne, right. So you did some workshops with them in Melbourne?
Melbourne and then in Sydney.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you have any memory of those initial workshops, what it felt like being involved in those workshops with them?
Well, I remember that it was exciting. There were people from the acting world, there were people from the therapy world. There was a whole range of people.
Yeah. And my understanding is in Sydney, I'm not sure whether in Melbourne as well, following the workshop there was a public performance.
That's right.
In Melbourne and in Sydney? Yeah. And
maybe more than one.
Right.
Well, I remember the Sydney one because that was at the Nimrod Theatre.
It was,
And I remember the Melbourne one was at Melbourne State College, which had a very good theatre.
Okay.
The Melbourne one was big too.
Yeah.
And all I remember is there was a story about a woman called Marika and her chooks, but I can't remember. It was pretty out there, but I don't remember.
Right.
Yeah.
That first Playback Theatre performance in Australia was held in Melbourne on June 28th and was followed by 2 other performances, each with a larger audience, with the 3rd performance having a packed house. You can see the team for those performances here. The next stop was Sydney and the Drama Action Centre for another series of performances and workshops. Phil Boas had rung Francis and Bridget to ask if they would be interested in sponsoring the Sydney leg of the trip. Being the improvisers they were, they said yes. However, it was a big financial and organisational commitment, especially given it was the first year of the Drama Action Centre. They'd only been in Sydney 3 months before the Drama Action Centre started, so they were scrambling in the dark. The gamble was worth it. The first performance in Sydney was to a packed house at the Nimrod Theatre, now Belvoir Street, on July 6th, followed by a second performance at the Greenwich Community Centre.
somewhere in the first half of that year, these posters started to appear. They were a reddish, brownish colour with the outline of a fox. And all they said was, Jonathan Fox is coming.
Right.
And they started to appear around Sydney. And then Bridget and Francis said, Jonathan Fox and some other people are coming from New York to run workshops in this new-ish form of theatre called Playback Theatre. And you all have to go. It'll be fantastic, and you all have to go.
Do you have a memory of what it was like seeing or exploring playback for the first time?
Yeah, it was just immediately sort of feeling, oh, this is interesting, because we've both done our psychodrama training and we're sort of used to that format of a director extracting the sort of the story and the scene from the protagonist. I don't know how much people realise this, but Jonathan Fox had done the psychodrama training in America, and he was sort of interested in how to make more theatre of the fact that in psychodrama people are telling their story.
And the psychodrama connection seems like it was a strong one for you.
I mean, I don't think we would have done it if we hadn't done the psychodrama connection. Totally not.
Right.
Because
that was something that was core for you around the work in drama action as well.
Yes, because when we were in New Zealand and we realised that we were working so closely with people, we realised that with this work where you're working with people's spontaneity and creativity, you're working also very closely with people's psychological processes. But then just seeing the transition that Jonathan had devised in making it more of a theatrical form.
Right.
And I mean, a lot of the forms that he used, we were very familiar with, like sculptures. Well, our improvisation had used machines, how to build group interaction through building machines and things. And I think, so I think we just were really open to it.
Actually, by the time we showed up in Sydney, drama action with their Lecoq groups, as well as an interest in applied theatre in the community, that was actually more central than psychodrama. Psychodrama was an important influence, and just as for Francis and Bridget, they went to Perth, but that wasn't their. I mean, it became more for Francis later with sociodrama and so forth, but it's never been our main interest.
And it wasn't, when I think of that whole trip, it was, the psychodrama world was not front and center by any means. It was, so we did make that initial connection at a psychodrama conference, but it wasn't the psychodrama community that we were, as far as in my recollection, that we were connecting with. It was this, wild bunch of creative Aussies and Kiwis, and who were connected most of all through Drama Action Centre.
Yes, I agree with Joe on that trip. The number of people from psychodrama who participated with us was relatively few.
Right, okay. So at this stage, Playback was 5 years old. Had you been doing many workshops to train others, or was it still in the phase of learning yourself?
We've begun to do some teaching.
Not so much.
But, looking back, now we think of a company that's 5 years old as being in its very early stages, so it's kind of outrageous age. But, so we had some idea of how to transmit it. And it worked, obviously.
Overall, do you have a memory of what those workshops were like in Australia and New Zealand?
Well, my one memory of how's Jonathan going to do this? At the beginning in Melbourne, I think there were 25 people in a workshop. how is the workshop going to be organized and structured, and how are we going to get everybody the chance that they needed to have to experience playback the best they could. It was very masterful. It's nice. I'm used to doing workshops for big bunches of people now, but I wasn't at the time.
Yes.
So I was very impressed. And then also, this was something very new. It was a risk and a challenge that Jonathan gave himself to give notes to each person at the end of each workshop, which I thought was very brave and honest and great.
Yes.
Jonathan. I was very impressed by Jonathan's authenticity and desire to not only say, oh, we're going to pick this person and this person and this person, but I'm going to show each person how I saw you.
Yeah, we shared very openly everything that we knew, and they were meeting us more than halfway. They were coming with performance skills and tremendous enthusiasm and openness, and many people had backgrounds of one kind or another that were relevant, and it is a long time ago, but my memory is in all of those workshops it was just kind of a ferment of creativity and encounter and co-creativity.
And I remember, I thought of myself as a theater person, even though I didn't have formal training in theater. So it was very meaningful to me that we would find ourselves at something called the Drama Action Center with people who were doing intensive theater training. And so I love that.
Yes.
And the difference pretty quickly that it established was that we were much more theatrically inclined than the American crew, because they hadn't done the theatre training. I'm not so familiar with the physicalization.
Right.
Or not so explorative with the physicalization.
Right. So what was that meeting like?
I think it took quite a while for, I suppose this is a sort of, I don't know whether this is accurate or not, but I think it took quite a long while for Jonathan and Joe to acknowledge the difference and sort of appreciate it.
And those first workshops must have been quite a discovery in a way.
Yeah. Sort of fun.
The physicality was so rich and so exciting. It kind of reminded me of my dance background.
What's your memory of the workshops, that 4-day workshop that you did with Jonathan and Joe?
Crowded. There were 40 people.
Right.
In a scout hall. It was just a place of delighted discovery for me. I got to play for 4 days with this new thing that I didn't even know existed before those 4 days. And I just took to it.
I have one just a scrap of a memory of Peter Hall and that first trip, who was studying at Drama Action at that time with his long curly hair, and he was such an eager student. I mean, everybody was, but I just remember him and the intensity of his eagerness, which was again a kind of recognition, because in those first 5 years we had just been trying to develop the stage work, and that somebody else would, trying to succeed with audiences. But here was people, and Peter in this case, who you could tell was really, excited about doing this, and so that was exciting for us.
And then we organised this performance at the Nimrod Theatre. Yeah. Which was wild. I remember sort of looking out at this huge audience thinking, oh my God.
I remember feeling out of my depth at times in it, and not quite having a sense of how to, you know, in one stage I think I was a child who just asked a lot of questions, and I didn't quite know how to bring that in.
Who conducted that performance?
I think Jonathan did.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was Judith Swallow and the three of them.
Yes.
I think Joe might have been doing the music. I know Francis is in that performance as well. I mean, Nimrod, the theatre was full. So we had attracted a lot of sort of theatre goers.
Yeah.
And also quite a lot of critique, because I think that they hadn't experienced that sort of community theatre before. A lot of, I can't remember how the critique manifested, but there was certainly a lot of opinions about it afterwards.
In both Melbourne and Sydney, and I'm not sure about New Zealand, but there was certainly a performance in Sydney.
Yes.
Well, there were two, and one was at the Nimrod Theatre.
Yes.
And they had a very strange set, so it was after the regular show. It started at 10:30 at night or something.
A Greek play, Greek tragedy or something.
And we adapted to this set, but the place filled up.
Yes.
And so that was a big thrill.
Yeah.
And then there was such interest that we did a second show at the Greenwich Community Centre.
Okay.
Right.
And in that show, Francis and a group of students did a little commedia interlude. As you probably know, we did workshops in each place, and we selected some of the workshop participants to act with us. So if you look at a photo there are about 8 people on stage, 4 of us, but 2 actors of us, and we had 4 actors. When we started, we had many more actors than we do now, because we were nervous. Or you see Bridget and Francis and I forget who else up there, and that model, they didn't have the skills that we had, but they knew the people.
Right.
And they knew the culture.
Yes.
And
really
this model really was a seed for much that happened later.
Yes.
And I think that was another reason, of course, that it added, it kind of upped the ante of the workshops, because we all knew that this would culminate in a performance in Melbourne. I think it was 3. 3 that we did. We did 1 in Wellington. I'm sure we did 1 in Auckland. I can't remember right now.
Yeah.
And 2 in Sydney. And so, we know this is coming up. They know it's coming up. There's this very awkward business of choosing some people to join us.
Yes.
And somehow that worked. That was all right. But I also remember, the kind of all the behind the scenes stuff, including in those days, we, the New York company, our performing outfits were kind of cotton pants and plain knit tops of different colors. And I would never in a million years do this now, but I took on making pants for all of our guest performers. So did I really do this? I did this.
You did this.
I did this. So, I sewed in amongst the workshop and getting ready for it. I made pants for all of our guest performers, so that we all were wearing the same outfit. I borrowed someone's sewing machine.
But Joe knew how to do this.
That's because I'm a Kiwi,
I mean, Michael and I were familiar with performing.
Yes.
And the idea of performing with people who are not our little tribe was exciting and interesting, and they were interesting people to perform with. I remember that expansion of possibilities.
Okay.
Because we were just, our original company was, like we've been together a long time.
Yes. So it must have been a little strange to be on stage with almost complete strangers. I mean, obviously you'd worked with them in the workshop, but really...
Yeah.
Never.
The form just takes over. Now we know that even in different languages, the form takes over. We didn't know that. We didn't even know that we could perform with people other than our little family.
Yes.
You know? So it felt actually familiar. It didn't feel strange at all.
Uh-huh.
It was a nice discovery.
You know, again, recollections of those performances were pretty intense and exciting.
And somewhat rough and ready as well. Yeah. But they worked.
They worked. Well, the audience liked it, so we were happy. I remember one story from the Nimrod performance, and it was someone saying, yeah, well, we had a kookaburra on the roof and it was really noisy, and that was the story. And later I thought, you know, this audience is too big. I mean, people are just telling anecdotes, but later, you know, as I learned more about they use stories as an expression of identity, really. You know, a kookaburra on the roof is not necessarily a superficial story in Australia. And so my lesson was I didn't really listen deeply enough.
There's also, there was more than one story like that, encounters with nature.
Sure.
And we've learned to recognize that these actually are very primal human stories about encounters with the natural world.
Yeah.
And, you know, we now know when someone offers a story like that, it's not at all slight, that people on a very, very deep level value these encounters. Yeah. So I think it was in Sydney when we went to do the second show at the Greenwich. It's always so familiar in playback that you're schlepping stuff, right? You're carrying and you're moving furniture and you're sweeping the floor. So they had milk crates, you know, that we used to sit on. And in the very early days of the New York company, we did too. They'd collected milk crates and they were piled up on the back, I think maybe tied with bungee cords or something to the back of someone's car, or maybe they're visible in or on the car. And we found this grumpy note attached to it saying, "These milk crates are stolen from the milk board," something like that.
The four Americans, Bridget, Frances, Mary Good, myself, went up to this beach in the Ku-ring-gai National Park. It was an outing before they flew back to the States, and there was much conversation, and Bridget and Frances and Mary, who were the senior people there, basically said, "We'd like to start a company here.
Right.
What do you think about that?" And Jonathan and the others said, "Yes, please do." There's a terrific sense of connection between what we do and what you do. The only thing we ask is that you acknowledge where the work has come from.
Yeah.
I don't think we were expecting that companies would spring up from these workshops, but and I don't have very clear memories of how that happened, but I do remember the feeling in all of them, all four of the workshops, that people were really embracing the work, and they were doing it very well. They were, you know, they brought such openness and artistry and also kind of homogeneity. You know, there were not a lot of big cultural gulfs to bridge. It seemed it was kind of an obvious next step. Like, we're not going to stop doing this just because you go home. You know, we're going to continue. So it felt very organic that there would be ongoing, you know, something coming out of this. After Australia, we did the similar series of things in Wellington, a
Okay.
workshop and
And
then
then
performance,
we went to
and then Auckland,
Right.
same thing.
So,
So it was those, Melbourne, Sydney, Wellington,
and we
Auckland.
did 19 days of work in something like 20 days. We were very exhausted, but we were so thrilled at the success of the whole trip that once we got home, it took me days and days and days to be able to fall asleep. It's just the excitement of it.
When we came back, oh my goodness, then we had the fire of what we did, and then we had a residential 2-week workshop in Playback Theatre at a country retreat place.
Right.
I think that was the exciting thing. Beforehand, we were kind of fuddling around ourselves and doing things.
And so the trip sparked a confidence in being able to spread and teach this form.
Oh yeah, it certainly did. And then it started, exploding around. So thank goodness for all the Aussies and Kiwis who are so enthusiastic and so energetic and so physical.
For the four of us, the Playback New York people, it was a very, very significant and bonding experience. We were already very closely connected, but to have this adventure, and each of us had our own, specific adventures there, or our flavor of our own individual experiences. But for the four of us, it was kind of a touchstone, that resonated, forever. Just that we shared that experience. It meant a lot.
When Playback started, we certainly from the beginning were not interested in controlling it or making money from it, or we had a kind of peer, if you like the song, sing it. And so we were more excited than anything when people in Sydney wanted to keep going.
We were thrilled.
Yeah.
There was absolutely no sense of, I don't think it ever occurred to us like, well, this is ours. No, it was the opposite. It was like, wow, how fantastic. You want to keep doing this. It was like we suddenly had this, these cousins and brothers and sisters, and it was great.
And of course we liked these people tremendously, so that made a big difference too. We wanted to stay in touch, and that they wanted to keep doing the work. It was great.
And there was a real sort of discovery of kinship, which continues to this day. Yeah.
Is there anything else you would add?
Just what an extraordinary gift it was. So these people came from their home and they said, we've made this thing. And we're happy for you to take it. Because we believe in it and we can see that you do too. It was a gift. And it's been a gift that has enlivened and nourished and expanded my being. And it's spreading like wildfire now around the world. And there's all sorts of organised trainings and schools and qualifications, and but that was a gift.